Okay, so like I said, we're going to keep talking about Node, although actually, first thing I'm going to talk about is something I kind of realized I should have mentioned before, which is mainly another way that you can do Ajax, as well as this concept of promises, which are sort of, I keep saying things are a new concept in JavaScript, but really it's been around for a little while, but it's more new. I find them kind of confusing, but I'm going to try to explain them the best I can. We're going to talk about templating, which is useful for, well, I'm not going to give away the game. And then we're going to talk about sessions. So, all right. So if you recall, we talked about how we do Ajax, particularly using this HTML HTTP request, which we can then make. This is a post request where we're uploading some JavaScript or some JSON, and we set the type of it here. So there's a new function in JavaScript that's a little bit more concise for how to do this, called fetch. And so this is what fetch looks like. So basically, it's doing the exact same thing, but so instead it's a little bit structured a little bit differently. So we call fetch. This is, I think, just built into JavaScript on most browsers at this point. So we call fetch with the path for the route that we're trying to access. We're going to make a post request. We set some headers. We're sending JSON, so we set application/JSON for what we're sending. I don't have car data up here, but we're just saying that the body is the stringified JSON of this car data object, which you can see here. So, so this is where things get a little bit weird. Is that instead of having this onReadyState function where we respond to things, we're using what are called promises. So this .done, and .catch. These are sort of the promises working here. So in this case, .done is called whenever this request successfully completes. This is actually a lambda function, which is sort of a shorthand notation for a function, which is another thing in JavaScript. But just think of this as function parentheses response, open brackets, return response.json, close brackets. You can look up, they're called lambda expressions. You have sort of the syntax for how these work. They're just a little bit shorter again, so you don't have as much clutter. Here's another one where we get data. And so the way that these promises are actually working is, so this is returning response.json. So this actually returns another promise. And so to catch that promise, we call .then again, and we get the JSON data of that promise. It's a success. And we have more examples here. And in case anything goes wrong, we have a catch. So this is sort of like a try-catch block using other languages where we can catch an error. And we can do that anytime we're using promises to catch errors that happen in our sequence. So basically, promises are very useful for handling asynchronous calls. So if we're making a network request to go get some data or send data, or if we're accessing promises exist both in the browser as well as in Node. So if we're accessing the file system or a database or something like that, oftentimes promises are useful for waiting on those things to succeed. So it's just a little bit of syntactic sugar, if you will. I know I've shown a lot of examples where there's lots of callbacks. Something that is really easy to get in trouble with JavaScript is to get into what is known as callback hell, where you have about like 8 different like inline functions that are calling each other, and you just have like this big long nested thing of functions. Promises help flatten that out, make things appear more serial, and then code ends up being a little bit more readable that way, and you have to tab less times. Okay, so, right, I think we'll stop using this red color. All right, so okay, so if you want to create your own promise, so say you're doing some sort of operation that makes an asynchronous call, or it takes a long time to process, or something like that, you can create your own promises. This is the basic structure of it. Basically, it takes a function to create a new promise, and it takes a function with two things that you pass in here. So there's a resolve and a reject. And so do the thing that is potentially going to take a long amount of time, and then if everything is fine, we call a resolve. And so this actually calls the .then function that you saw before, whatever you're trying to do succeeded. If there's an error or something fails, you call reject, which will throw an error and it'll get caught by .catch. All right. So here's kind of what that could look like if we were implementing something like fetch. So this is an example where we're creating a promise that makes an XML HTTP request. So we create an XML HTTP request. And then in our onload callback here, if everything's okay, that is, we get size 200, we call the resolve with our response. Whereas if something fails, we call a reject with an error, with the status text of the request error. Creating error objects is useful because it creates a stack trace that you can access to see what went wrong. Oftentimes with these asynchronous callbacks, it can be difficult to understand where things went wrong. If you use these error objects, you can do a stack trace. Again, if we have another error that's like a network error that gets thrown by XML HTTP request, we call reject again. So this is sort of how you would promisify an XML HTTP request. And so you can use it like fetch in this case. Right. And then there's more red text that you can't read, just to call out the different pieces of the promise. All right, so you can do really crazy things with promises. You can like chain them together, where basically I'm doing an asynchronous thing that returns a promise, and then I can say .then on that, which then calls another thing which returns a promise, and then .then. I put in an error handler here, or if there's no error, then I can keep handling and keep doing asynchronous things, going down here and adding more catches and everything is doing.
Could you give an example of like what asynchronous things might be?
Yeah, so an asynchronous thing is like if I have to make a AJAX call to a web API, like say to a Facebook API, that would be an asynchronous thing. So I have to make a network connection to somewhere else. It takes a little while for it to come back. If I'm in Node and I submit a database query, that takes a little while for the database to look it up and come up with a response. That would be an asynchronous thing. If I'm reading a file, that would tend to be an asynchronous thing. Usually anything that requires I/O. You could potentially also do this. There's some frameworks for things with threads, where if you like spawned up a thread to go do some work, it does some work for a little while, I could like wait on that to get done asynchronously. And so that would be another example. So, okay, I find these personally kind of hard to understand, but they are fairly useful in terms of simplifying chains. Yeah.
So that function in parentheses airline, the down, is dot catch or anything like that there, or is it supposed to be like? What is the catch mean? Right, but before the function, there'd be like a dot catch. Or is it like chaining? I see a comma. Yeah. I'm just like, no.
I copy pasted this example from somewhere, and now that I'm looking at it, it seems a little bit off.
Should there be a promise there, or they?
Yeah, I'm gonna say not worry about it. Okay, I'm not really sure what exactly is happening here. This is closing off this, but then there's a comma. So, yeah. Okay. That's done. Yeah. Basically, thens are handling when things are a success, such as when things are fail, and you can get rid of this. I only wanted to bring this up because there's increasingly more like packages and APIs in Node as well as in client-side JavaScript that are using promises. So I didn't want you to like encounter those without having seen them first. If they're confusing to you as they are to me, there's a pretty good write-up about how they work here. Although this is where I got this crummy example from. So, grain of salt. Okay. Do people vaguely understand what a promise does? All right. So back to actually server-side specific functionality. Do people know what template name is? We'll talk about web applications. Valentine here? I bet Valentine knows. What do you think?
I have an example like a session.
That's
an example of a template agent.
Yep, so that's an example of a template name engine. So, okay. So try to explain what it is it's a way of dynamically creating HTML content on the server by using sort of code embedded inside of HTML code to import other either data or other pieces of HTML code. I guess maybe the easiest way to explain it is with an example. And so I have a PHP example, just because if you've ever worked with PHP, it kind of works like this. So this would be an example of a very simple PHP file, which mostly works like HTML, where I have HTML, body tags, regular structure. However, I have these funky PHP tags right here. So what actually happens is I echo hello world in this case, and the PHP code will take that output and it'll just stick it right here in my HTML code. And so what I'll end up with is just all of this with hello world here instead of these funky codes. And so this is I could do all sorts of programmatic things here to come up with what the output is supposed to be. So generally, this is in this case, is how templating ends up working. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples with a Node framework called embedded JavaScript, which basically is very similar in that in my template code, I have HTML content here, but then I can include some of these tags, which are not the same as PHP, but similar. And what actually happens here is this includes the content of a different template file in my code here. And I know some of you asked me when you're working on your personal websites, like, how do I get this code to look the same, or like, I have a lot of this code that is the same for every one of my websites, or every one of my pages. I just told you, just like copy paste it to all of your files. So instead of doing that, we have a dynamic templating model like this. Basically, I could write up all of the HTML code that describes how my headers look, and then it's going to file off by itself. And then every page, I can just say, hey, just include that here, instead of like having to copy paste it multiple times. Same thing. Go ahead.
So for our last assignment, we could have done this, but it would have been header.html and footer.html.
So the file extensions, I believe in this case, it actually ignores what the extension is, what the file extension is, but it uses .ejs for this particular framework, which stands for Extended JavaScript, which is this like code style. So I have an example that I'll bring up, but what you would have in those other files would be something that looks like this. You would have like header code with, so this is my template header or whatever kind of code you want in there, and you would have footer code that has over. You could stick that in there, and it would get stuck into all of your different files and look the same. So let's see. Do I actually have an example of that part? I think I do. So this is from before. Open folder. All right. So in this case, this is again what my code would look like, where I have my HTML with my includes here, and that is in this index.ejs file here, which is sort of like the top level template for my index page. But this references what are called these partial templates, which I have here in footer.ejs and header.ejs. And just to give you an idea of how, let's go back to the presentation real quick. I have like two examples in one here. Let's see. Okay. So just make this not red. Okay, so what you end up doing is setting up your Express node module pretty much the same way. You require Express. This does require the npm package EJS. But what I do here is I set what's called view engine for Express to EJS. Whenever I make the request, I just say response.render, and then I give it the title of the template that I'm interested in. And that will go and it'll execute the JavaScript inside of my EJS templates, and then generate a big HTML file after doing all that, and then send that to the client. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like. I'm just going to, all right, I'm doing that here with index.ejs. I have two examples in one here, so just kind of ignore the other for the moment. Okay, so I go access my page at just regular index. It puts the header up at the top. I have change content in between, and then it embeds the footer also at the bottom. So it's pretty simple. However, you can actually, this is actually a little bit more flexible with where you can actually dynamically change the data that appears in your template. So this example is a little bit more complicated, where we're actually embedding more actual like executing code with JavaScript inside of our file here. So if I pass in some data to my template, I can then do operations on that. So in this case, I have a loop that's going over all of the cars and an array of cars that I assign to my template. And as I loop through that, it is creating line items in an unordered list, basically outputting the color, year, make, and model of the car as I go through. There's a little bit of a semantic difference between the types of tags that I do here. So in this case, with the percentage equals, it takes the output of the statement and puts it in as text into my file. Whereas if I just do percentages, this is just like executing code. It doesn't actually output anything.
So you can elements that you put into your page, you can just style them. Like is it
yeah.
Your page?
So ultimately, this outputs HTML. So if you wanted to, you could put like a class or an ID on these elements, and you could just style them with CSS. Okay. Okay. So in this case, this is how you could potentially operate on data. So this is how you would pass the data in. So I have a big data set of car data up here, but whenever I'm actually rendering my page, I have my route /garage, and so I render my template pages/garage, and I pass in this data object into the engine, which I could put other pieces of data in here. I could put user, I could put whatever I wanted, and then it would be accessible to the template. But here I'm just putting in cars. So what you end up getting, so here I have this code also in this example. So right, in this case, I have, it outputs this unordered list that has just the text that I output in all of these examples. So this is a very useful thing. Say you wanted to like, if you think about like the Facebook interface, oftentimes like the up in the header, there'll often be like an image that's your profile image, and like your name or profile, your name. So you can think about passing in like the user and a user object into this template engine, which would automatically put that data into the header automatically. So this is just a way of creating dynamic pages without having to like code up manually a bunch of like string concatenations to make the HTML that you want to send back to your client. If that makes sense. Okay. Are there any questions about how templating works, at least in this case? Why you would want to do this? So are people pretty clear on why you would want to be using templates? In the case of Node.js, I mentioned that there are several different types of tags. We have ones that ignore white space, ones that output unescaped content versus escaped content into your HTML page. So if you're like outputting things like angles and like quotation marks or things that are generally special characters in HTML. You would probably want to escape them if you want them to appear in your code, or you can choose not to escape them if you want, depending on what behavior you want. Different types of behavior. If you want to learn more about EJS, here's the link. I generally think this is one of the more straightforward templating engines available on Node. However, there are many templating engines available on Node. If you remember last time, I told you that there are a bunch of strangely named packages and available in Node. Here's a few of them. You have handlebar.js, mustache.js, which is actually named that because its escape characters use a lot of curly brackets, which look like mustaches. Pug, which is also previously known as Jade, which doesn't actually even look like HTML. It uses like tag names without any of the like angle brackets or anything like that. Its syntax looks a little weird to me. I haven't really taken a look at these, but I thought the names were pretty fun. Like handle and nunchucks. But there's a list of about 20 of these or so that are pretty popular. Express React Views is a server-side React view rendering. We're going to talk about React in this semester, but there is some functionality for doing templating React. Okay. So that's all I have for templating. How am I doing? Pretty good. So I'm kind of burning through this, but we'll get through this fast. So, does anyone know what a session is when we talk about servers, web programming? Oh, my favorite student Valentine. Yeah, no one knows these things, but no one else wants to take a stab at it. It's not like there's reading ahead of time, so if you need to know, we can talk about it. I'm not expecting you to know. But I do know some students. Yeah.
It's like when you interact with the server, so every time we have to authenticate one user. So throughout the session, throughout the time slot, whenever you wanted to access between server and client, so throughout that we need to validate again.
So yes. So just to reiterate what you said, a session is basically a way of keeping track of state or data that is associated with a particular browser client, web client that has started interacting with your page. So without a session, anytime someone requests a page from my web server, I don't, it's like I have amnesia. It's a new person every time. I don't know how I should react differently to this person. I can't rely on anything that I knew beforehand. So a session is a way of keeping track of the data that is associated with a particular session or user that is attached, that is requesting something from my web server. Why might this be something that is useful?
You might not want someone on the page for too long, or not have to spend memory to that page for too long.
So generally, the things are stateless without this, and so this is like a way of keeping track of like knowing things about someone that's accessing pages like longer. So we're like adding more memory on the server, or a way of keeping track of those people. But what kind of common things on websites do we want to keep track of as people move around between different pages? like login. So we want to keep track of who the user is. We don't want to have them log in and the next page they go to, it's like, who are you? We think about something like an online shopping application. We could want to keep track of their shopping cart. So, we could put in, all the items that they have in their shopping cart into the session. Lots of different things that we could think about in the session. Okay. So I'm going to talk about how we implement sessions with Express and Node. You need Express, but more importantly, you need Express Session, which is a package that enables the storing of sessions with Express. And you need what's called a session store, which is basically a way of actually saving that data as time continues. So a way for actually keeping track of the session on the server. And having it persist so that if the server goes down and comes back up, I still have the sessions. All right. So the way we would instantiate this is I create a session from this expression session module, and then I create a file store for that session by using this session file store package. I have to pass it the session object that I'm using just because I think there's something in this package that needs to know like what kind of session I'm using. And then we instantiate our session. We need several things. One of these is the name that we want to use for our session. This is going to be unique to our website. It'll be different on other websites. A secret, this is used for doing like a lightweight encryption of our sessions so that they're somewhat protected. This is saying these are basically parameters for how and when our session should be saved to our store. So I think resave is anytime a connection disconnects that our session will be resaved. A save uninitialized is even if we don't initialize the session, again, we'll save it. And then we specify what kind of file store we're going to use, or what kind of session store we're going to use. In this case, we're using file store. Okay, and so what does this enable you to do? By having this session attached to Express, which is actually using a middleware, this .use here, it modifies the request objects anytime we are writing Express routes to basically add in this session object into our requests. And so we can store any kind of data that we want in that session. In this case, I'm just setting this number, which is just counting how many times that the page has been viewed. So normally I would have no idea of that. It would just be a new day every time someone requested something. But here, I basically check to see if use exists in the session. If it doesn't, then I set use to 1. This is the first time that you've ever been visiting the page. I output that. If use does exist, I increment use and then output how many times that page has been visited. So I can run that example for you real quick. Okay, so the first time I visit this page, the first time you've been here, blow it up for you. And if I hit refresh, hey, you've been here 2 times, 3, 4, 5, 6, yada, 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 it goes up. And so you could think about storing any kind of data that you want with this particular user inside of the session. And also just as an example, like if I open up a incognito window, which gets rid of all of my data about my connections. So let's see, local is 3000. Then, hey, this is the first time I've ever seen this person again. So this is sort of a way you could simulate someone else connecting. All right. So that was the demo. So yeah.
Was the after the session for thirds when you like close the browser?
So how does this work underneath? Like what mechanism are we using to actually make these sessions work? How do we know that it's the same session over multiple pages or tabs? I know that you've all heard this one. We use cookies, except not these types of cookies. So, can anyone explain to me what a cookie is? Or do they have an idea about what a cookie is? Okay. So,
What session?
that's definitely what it does. Basically, what ends up happening is whenever I connect to a web server for the first time, I just connect to it, and I just send a GET request, and their server will see this, and notice that I'm not. So the client is the one that stores the cookie ID, right? So the cookie is just a little piece of data on the client that it serves as an identifier. If I don't have one of those, I just send a clean GET request to the server. The server says, this person doesn't have a cookie. So the server picks a cookie, and whenever it's responding to the client, it sends this HTTP header set cookie, and then it gives it a cookie name and a value. And so the client will see that, and saves that in its little cookie store, which is associated with each individual domain. So if you're at cs.msu.edu, you'll have some cookies associated with that. They'll be different than google.com. There is a way to do cross-site cookies, which is how Google AdSense keeps track of all of your behavior and how Facebook keeps track of all your behavior. But
Help identify you.
Yes. Yes, so cookies are basically a unique identifier that your browser stores and then sends to servers whenever it makes a request of those servers. So after the server tells the client what the cookie is, it'll state it, and any forward GET request to that server, it'll send along this HTTP header cookie equals session ID with unique identifier for you. So what the server then does is uses that ID as a way of looking up either a database or some sort of file or some way of remembering data. It'll use that as a lookup for the session. So in a big dictionary or a database, it'll use that ID to look up what the session data is for that client, and then the server can then use that data to do whatever it wants. But the actual data that's in your session is served on the server, not on the client. So let's see if I can sort of point that out a little bit more. So different kinds of session stores. So I'm going to close this incognito window here. So I'm actually using a file store in this example. So the server is saving all of my cookie data inside of a flat file. which is good for very lightweight applications, would not be good for like a large website with millions of users. So let me see if I can show you how that looks. All right. So this is the project file for the sessions example I have. There's a sessions folder. If I look in here, it's actually, I guess, saving each session in a unique file. If these are just JSON files, so the ID of the session is the name of the file. So in this case, it's ZDFSW4 blah blah blah. So if I open this up with, let's see, this is not a very readable view for y'all. Okay, let's just open this up here. So, view, appearance. I don't know how to get, toggle word wrap, here we go. Okay, so this is the cookie or the session store contents for this particular session. I can see that this is just a JSON object. It says I have a cookie. It has some data here about generally the expiration of my cookie. So oftentimes servers will only hold on to cookies for X amount of time so that they can basically time out and they're no longer valid. That'll get refreshed every time you hit the page generally. Let's see. So I have a storing number of views. This is the view data that I was saving on my session right here. And then I have the last access. So this is the last time that the cookie was accessed, which is used for a timeout. So you have this little data structure that gets saved in the file. Anytime that this page gets hit, it'll open up this file and check this data. So this is probably pretty slow having these different files. Oftentimes it's done with a database. When I talk to data, I'm going to talk about databases coming up in the next probably in a week or two, which you would normally use for large scale session saving. But just as an example for what's going on here. So this is how these sessions get saved on the server. In this example. And all right. So as and also just to show you how the cookies are getting saved. So I'm going to do F12. Okay. So I'm going to look at the network requests that are happening between the server and the client using the Chrome debugger. So I'm going to load the page for, I'm going to preserve, let's see, preserve log. So I'm going to load this for the first time. Again, this is incognito. So whenever you go into incognito, it doesn't have any cookies or cache or anything like that. So it's a whole new person is encountering the server. So I hit this. This says it's the first time that I have viewed it. So when I look at the request that is going to the server, so basically there's no cookie that gets set here that gets sent in the request headers because the browser doesn't know what the cookie is. I know it's a little bit hard for y'all to read here, but there is a cookie, a set cookie in the response headers that is coming back from the server right here. And so this says server session cookie ID, which was the name of the cookie name that I specified when I initialized my session. And then there's some gobbledygook ID that's set right here, which is the ID of my cookie. if I refresh the page and I look at the next one, so whenever I make my next request, in the request headers, there is a cookie that is sent to the server. So if I look at the login, get this sent here. So, is that clear to people? People understand kind of how cookies work, how sessions work, and why that's useful. All right. So we took a look at how that works, how things are getting stored, how the data is getting passed back and forth. All right, and so I've already been kind of talking about this a little bit. In this example, we've been using a file store. Why might we want to use something like a memory store instead of a file store? What would be an advantage of doing that? What would be a disadvantage? I already talked about databases, but what about just like storing all the values in memory? Yes, who said? Yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't see you, Jeff. All right, I saw you, but I didn't see you. Whoops. So yes, it will be faster, just because I'm looking at things directly in memory. However, what would be a disadvantage?
It's only temporary.
Yeah, it will only be temporary. So if my server crashed, I would lose all of my session data. So, yeah, the typical trade-offs you would think about with using these sort of things apply here. All right, that's pretty much all I have for today. Anyone have any questions or comments about these topics? Yeah, people sort of encountered like cookies before and sessions and this kind of thing. Did I help like maybe demystify it a little bit? Okay, that's good. All right, well, that's all I have for today. I'll probably hang out a little bit if you have questions about the upcoming assignment. Celine, the TA, was telling me that last time we looked yesterday, there were still some missing individual assignments. So if that is your case, just know that you're losing 10% per day. So make sure you get them turned in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I update the website